everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into our podcast. Today, Kyle and I, we're going to be solo and we're going to be talking about all things trucking, give you a little bit of update where we've been and where we're going. So, Kyle?
Yeah, this has definitely been the last, 3 years since COVID have been a bit of a crazy freight market. You've had probably the biggest boom you've ever had in trucking and transportation rates. And, for parts of 2021 and 2022, all the trucking companies were loving it. People that are shippers were probably not so much loving it because they're having trouble getting their loads shipped out, the goods shipped to you, and having to pay really high rates for that. And then now here in the tail end of 2022 and in 2023, it's been not a great year for trucking companies because rates came back down. Whenever you have a big boom, what goes up has to come back down. And we're kind of coming out of the freight recession. The news outlet FreightWaves last year, their CEO Craig Fuller wrote about the coming trucking bloodbath. And I don't know that it's been a bloodbath yet, but we have started to see some signs where things are gotten really tough for some trucking carriers. Yellow Freight went out of business this week. Been in business for almost 100 years. They finally closed their doors and starting to see, companies leave the market. So,
but that's what we need because rates aren't going to go up until people start rejecting these lower rate loads. So when people say, hey, I'm not taking that load, it's too low, that's when the shippers are going to have to raise their rates.
Yeah, and you got to kind of there's two things that kind of have to happen on that. And you got one, the market itself washes, carriers out of the market. Right now trucking's a commodity business and it's supply and demand. So, those of you who know that curve, the more supply you have, the demand's lower and the rates are lower. When you have high demand and low supply of trucks, then rates go higher, and that's when it becomes tougher to cover your freight. And right now we're in a period of excess supply and low rates, and demand's actually lighter too. Especially compared to where we were in COVID. So kind of what you have to have now is you got to have two things kind of happen. You need to see some economic activity pick up to. If supply is going to stay relatively the same, economic activity is going to have to pick up and, drive rates higher, drive demand. But that's not necessarily happening to the extent that it needs to. And then on the other end, you need to have basically people leave the market, whether they go bankrupt, they decide, hey, this isn't a good business for us anymore. Basically, you got to have those trucks get parked or, like I said, leave the market and not start running rates or running freight. And then you'll start seeing things stabilize, which we've actually started to see here over the past, say, eight months or so. The rate of decline has slowed and actually starting to see pockets in the United States, different areas, rates start to come back up and demand get a little bit higher. And so there's a lot of things that play into that as well that we can talk about.
One thing that's happening also is you have owner-operators. So that's a big factor. So when the rates went up, a lot of people thought, hey, I want to be my own boss. I'm going to get my own truck. I'm going to get my own trailer. And they were getting these great rates. Things were awesome for a lot of people. And then now that the market's tightened, a lot of these owner-operators aren't seeing those high rates. And so they're having trouble paying for these expensive trucks that they bought, these expensive trailers. Now they're starting to have some maintenance. You got to set money aside for that. Truck maintenance is really expensive. So some of those people maybe are leaving the market, going back to company drivers. So there's a lot of factors of things that are happening that are going to tighten up the rates. And it's not a matter of if the rates are going to go up, it's a matter of when. So a lot of industry leaders don't know if that's going to be 8 months or 18 months, but a lot of people are going to have to tough it out to get to where the rates, even if they just go up 5%, if they stabilize, all these things would be big pluses for us.
Yeah, a lot of guys, the barriers to entry for trucking are fairly low. They're fairly easy. Anybody can go get a truck and get their DOT authority and go start running freight. But what happened during COVID, inflation hit everywhere. Prices of equipment went through the roof. Trucks that cost about $140,000 all in back in 2019, those things were costing $200,000, $220,000, $230,000, and people are buying those there. And then trailers, dry van trailers, a brand new dry van was about $25,000, $30,000, 2018, 2019. And a brand new dry van was, in some cases, $60,000, $70,000. So you had owner operators, hey man, I got $5, $6 rates in some places happening. And then they go out and buy a $220,000 truck, $70,000 trailer. And now they're in the business for $300,000 of debt that should have only been about 170 back in 2019. Well, guess what? The rates came back down fast. And a lot of those owner operators, man, now they're having to turn those trucks back in, walk away from the trucks.
They're changing their business model.
Yeah. And now they're coming back and driving for companies. And so that's a cycle that happens. This happens about every every 2 to 3 years in trucking. You get rates come up, then you have to come back down. It's just a constant up and down capacity adjustment. And usually it goes along with the economy. As the economy grows too, you need more capacity. So you kind of have a leveling up, then you kind of come back down a little bit and you build that back up. It's just kind of a constant up and down with trucking, but it was so much more extreme during COVID. And then there's so many other ripple effects that happened, especially with new equipment. And on the price of equipment, by the way, used equipment is starting to kind of come back down to earth a little bit. But new equipment, I don't know if those prices are going to come down, anytime soon. You can still, if you got good relationships with your dealers and things like that, you're still not going to be paying that $200,000, $220,000. But those prices now are probably like I said, that were about 140 back in 2018, 2019. Those prices are probably 160, 170. And so for a brand new tractor. So you got to be smart with, as a trucking company owner, you got to be smart with your equipment purchases. We felt like we were with us at UFL Services, we felt like we were pretty good with what we purchased and bought. But again, it's still been a very tough market for everybody going through 2023.
And the other thing about companies going out of business or these owner operators not running their trucks is that's going to also lower the truck price in the aftermarket, because you have these people dumping off all these trucks that they're not using. So the cost to buy a used truck is going to go down. But the thing about paying for new equipment is once prices go up, once you're starting to pay factory workers more for building things, you can't really lower the prices. So once prices go up, they may stabilize. So they may not. Yeah, for new equipment, they may stabilize, but you're not going to see things get less expensive.
Yeah, and we're about to see, I'm not sure what I know Yellow Freight, I think they had around 20 or 30,000 tractors. They're about to liquidate. So you're about to see 20,000 tractors and however many trailers they have. They probably have about a 5 or 10 to 1 ratio of trailers to tractors. All that stuff's going to be hitting the market because they got to liquidate it. And so that's going to drive down some of the rates as well for used equipment, because all those day cabs, they don't have a lot of sleepers, but a lot of those day cabs and things like that are going to be hitting the market, and that's going to drive prices down. So
our recruiter has also said that they're already looking for other jobs. We've had drivers apply over the weekend for jobs.
Yeah, and what happened with Yellow is an interesting case. That company's actually been on the verge of bankruptcy now for nearly 20 years. And, the company's been around for 100 years. They're Teamster, and it's not necessarily the Teamsters that probably dragged that company down into bankruptcy. A lot of people might blame them. But the company had a lot of failed mergers and failed integrations. Starting back in 2003, they bought Roadway Corporation. The integration with that took too long. They also bought the USF group of companies, USF Holland, those guys. And then they didn't see the 2009 recession coming, and so they had loaded the company up with debt and then tried to reorganize and come out of that, and then the recession hit. So they, kind of bought all these things back in 2005, and another boom period hit the recession, kind of went through there, and then they've been kind of just treading water ever since coming out of the 2009, 2010 recession. And then this freight cycle finally caught up to them. So, they're closing their doors, which it's going to be a good thing overall for the industry.
But it's sad for them.
Yeah, it's sad for them and those people that lost their livelihoods and stuff. But it's a good thing for the industry to start seeing capacity wash out from a trucking perspective. From a trucking company owner perspective, it's these things have to happen in the industry, and it's part of the overall freight cycle that happens about every 3 to 4 years. So, and hopefully those guys, they can go out and find jobs, and because drivers are always going to be in demand. So another caveat to this current freight market is during COVID, all the seasonality in the markets. You know, you had your different types of year, different parts of the year that freight was, freight demand was higher, maybe during produce season when people were moving produce, or you had different inventory fulfillment cycles for, people getting ready for Christmas holidays or different buying cycles. A lot of that was all those models that you currently had for seasonal freight volumes. COVID blew all that up for a few years, because all the factories, all these different places were shut down. They couldn't make freight. And then all of a sudden you had this big rush to fulfill everything. So you had, everything, all the stuff coming from overseas, all the boats, everything were just loaded with freight and constantly getting it loaded as fast as possible. And then people were just buying, inventory managers, planners, they were buying whatever they could because they didn't know what they could get. And so then they had all this stuff in their warehouses thinking that they could sell, because buying demands changed during COVID. So now we get out of COVID, all that stuff that they bought was no good. So last year, we didn't have the typical type of peak season and different typical seasonal freight patterns that we had last year, because all these warehouses were full of product that they had to get rid of. And so you didn't have the normal peak season that you had last year. Now we're coming into this year, and now we're finally starting to see normal seasonal buying patterns for, freight and, things coming into the warehouses, getting ready for peak season, stuff like that. You're starting to see that seasonality come back into the market, kind of looking a little bit more like what it did in 2018, 2019 when it comes to, inventory replacement cycles. So we're hoping that this year you start to see, it may not be as big as a normal peak season, but we should see something better than we did last year, where you didn't really see a lot of the normal type of peak season with things coming in from coming in off the containers, coming in and then getting, sent to warehouses and things this year. You're starting to see a little bit more of that normal pattern this year.
I have heard that a lot of retailers would rather run out of things than overbuy. So this year, make sure you get all your things early, because once they're gone, they're probably going to be gone. They're not going to have a bunch of extra stock on the shelves.
Yeah. Yeah, because that was one thing that a lot of buyers and a lot of companies got stuck. Walmart said it. Target also said, hey, we, buying patterns changed. Stuff that people bought during COVID, maybe bigger ticket items like, patio furniture, home furnishings, things like that people were shipping. All of a sudden they had that in their warehouse. And then everybody started going outside and doing stuff again when COVID came back up. So all that stuff now, hey, I don't need that anymore. I bought that last year. And so they were stuck with a lot of this inventory. And so now this year, finally, again, getting back to those normal kind of buying patterns. And we're starting to see it too in some of the data we look at to keep up with the market. Container imports are coming back. Things are starting to come back into the country, flow back in especially for maybe a little early this year than they normally would. People might be trying to buy some stuff up a little early to get here, so they have it ready to go on the shelves for holiday buying season. But things are starting to pick up a little bit,
but not as much. So many things from overseas. We're starting to see more domestic.
Well, not as much from one thing that's actually interesting. So the container imports are still there, but I don't know the extent of this, but there's not as much coming in from China. And COVID changed a lot of buying patterns. Where people now are ordering goods from China. Now they probably resource those. Maybe they're coming from Mexico or from other, maybe coming from other places besides China. But the volume of containers is actually coming into the country is starting to come back up. But the volume from China it's not as much coming from China and where we normally had seen it, prior to COVID. So that, COVID changed so many things, and, people are nearshoring, bringing things back, maybe making things closer to home, or they found different suppliers that, you know, that weren't subject to having some of the issues that China had during COVID. So COVID brought a lot of changes, but now though the one thing that is changing is the seasonality is coming back. It's just not coming from the same places. So
very interesting. So should we talk about electric vehicles? I know everyone wants to hear about electric vehicles.
We can talk about electric vehicles. We get asked about electric all the time, and
here, can I go first?
Yeah, you go first. I'm probably tired of answering this question.
So electric vehicles, one, use a lot of natural resources from different areas around the world. Two, they're using diesel in the factories to make the batteries. Once the batteries are done, what are you going to do with them? And then the power grid that it takes, if you have a vehicle in your house and you're charging that, that's fine. But when you're talking about a tractor trailer that's 16 to 18,000 pounds, that's pulling a trailer, and you're taking that cross country, it's just, I hate to say it, but it's not going to work unless they redo how they're making the batteries. Maybe they can charge while they're running. But, there's truck stops in Arizona that's like 1 every 100 miles. So you're talking about barely having a truck stop, and then you're wanting them to do a power grid. Another thing is all the power companies have to be in agreement. We were listening to someone at top of the truck stop company, and they said just in Tennessee, you have 7 or 9 power companies that would all have to be on the same grid. And to charge a vehicle the way it is at a truck stop, it's going to be tough.
Yeah, to have the volume, if you go to a truck stop and see the amount of trucks coming in, you're going to need just for that one truck stop, the amount of power that you need to charge all those trucks as they come in, just say is the equivalent of what you need for a town of 100,000 people currently. So
hold on, think about that. The same amount of power for that many people is what you need to charge
for like one truck stop in a normal course of business day. Obviously, some are different, but you think about the amount of power and electricity you're going to need there. So where are you going to get that electricity? We still currently make most of our electricity from coal, and natural gas, and so fully going fully electric is a tough thing. And with the best ways to get some of that, the most efficient ways to get some of that energy, nuclear or things like that, people are afraid of having those. Nobody wants to have a nuclear plant in their backyard. So coming up with the power to fully electrify, it's one thing for passenger vehicles, but, heavy duty trucks are a whole other different thing. And then there comes into the thing for electric trucks is the range.
Even how wind can affect it.
I mean, there's so many things. Yeah, there's so many things that are negligible. That might be even kind of negligible now on a passenger vehicle. They do not become negligible on a truck. Even the electric F-150 that came out, Ford, comes back and says
we love Fords.
Yeah, we do. But they had issues with their range on just a pickup truck. And they said, hey, there was a study. A guy went and had Ford said that they could get, I think, about 150 miles pulling a 5,000-pound trailer down the road. Okay, well, so then they get a 5,000-pound trailer, and next thing you know, they're in a Target parking lot because their range went from 150 down to 80,
yeah.
And they're trying to charge their Ford pickup truck because because they didn't have enough range to get where they were going to do this news article. All loads are not created equal when it comes to pulling those things. Let's think about a high-profile dry van trailer pulling 40,000 pounds, or even a flatbed that's fully, kind of flatly loaded, doesn't have any wind resistance. That's going to pull different, have different range there, just because of the wind resistance on the trailer. You're driving into a wind, or you got a wind behind you, that's going to affect greatly the range. Also temperature, going through temperature extremes, going up and down mountains, all that affects range. One day you could have, a 500-mile range on a truck. The next day you could only have 300. And all that comes into play with weather. As an engineer, we're thinking about, different types of friction on the roads. One day you got rain, one day you don't have rain. All these things make make it tough. Yeah, make a difference on electric vehicles and greatly affect the range. And actually, people are now even starting to see this on their passenger vehicles that, hey, turning the heat on, doing certain things like that.
Uses power.
Yeah, it affects the way they travel. And so right now for long haul heavy duty trucks, electric is not a good option. It's probably good for around the city, stop and go. I see a lot of trash trucks and things like that using it. But right now for the electrification for long haul heavy duty trucks, that is a long way off. And there's so many problems that have to be solved there before it can anywhere be remotely feasible for most, heavy duty trucking applications.
Hydrogen power would be really awesome, but one, it's not going to make the people selling things a lot of money because once you have it, that's it. And then two, the danger aspect of it exploding.
Yeah, nobody wants to have a hydrogen bomb driving down the road. But there was a study that came out, I think it was last year. Electric vehicles are only the third or fourth most efficient form of fueling of power for a vehicle. The two most efficient forms of power for kind of protecting the environment, reducing emissions. One is hydrogen powered fuel cells, which there's a lot of research there going in. And I think if you really are going to go down the path of trying to become energy efficient and reducing emissions, you're going to have to go down the hydrogen route. And that's one that's got to be figured out, and all the regulations there. And actually the other one, the second most feasible one of the study that came out was biodiesel. So think about all the things that you use, grease, cooking grease and things like that you can actually turn into diesel fuel. That's actually more fuel efficient and cleaner for the environment, according to the study, than actually going electric. And so, and those you can actually, with biodiesel, I don't know how much biodiesel can actually be created, with what we have, but that's actually cleaner than, using electric power. And you can actually use current engine technology for that. So those are some other alternatives when it comes to electric vehicles that, we get asked that all the time. Hey, are you ordering Tesla semis? No, we're not. And there are no plans anytime soon for us to order them, especially, and probably most heavy duty long-haul trucking companies, executives that you talk to, they will tell you the same exact thing because of that. Electric is not a good form of transportation right now, especially for moving goods long distances.
I did hear out in California, they asked people to not charge their vehicles because they were having some power grid issues.
Yeah.
At least here in Georgia, you can still get around when you're having tough power.
Yeah. So the power grid so just to summarize everything, for full scale electric especially across trucking, you need a whole lot of power, a whole lot of electricity. We don't really have a way to generate that yet. And
so you're going to have to redesign how they make the batteries.
And the batteries, you got to be able to charge them more quickly. And there are other fuel sources out there that can be applied to trucking and applied to transportation that need more research and need more things done before you can really go it. So right now, the current state of diesel engines is kind of where it's at. And, they've come a long way too with emissions on diesels. I mean, gone are the days, unless somebody's blatantly breaking the law, all new modern diesel engines, gone are the days of the black smoke billowing out of a truck as you're sitting at a red light. These things are pretty clean. They've got a lot of systems on them.
They recycle the air with the DEF.
Yeah, everything's filtered, the particulate. I drive a diesel pickup truck. I don't have any black smoke coming out of there, and you kind of keep track of, the exhaust that comes out. They do produce a lot of new diesel engines do produce a lot of heat. That's one of the way they burn off the soot for it. But the technology has come along. It's come a long way for reducing emissions. And so before we just throw away fossil fuels and things like that, we should look at what we currently have and then other technology.
Well, we really appreciate everybody tuning in today. I hope you like what you heard. And if you do,
all right, talk to everybody soon.
Bye.